I said for the first time ever, like even to myself, I said, I have a problem with alcohol. And it was like everything shifted. She understood more. I understood more. It was undeniable that that was so true. That statement was so true that it impacted everything up until then.
All right, my friends, I am so excited to welcome Cait Madry to Sober Stories. Cait, thanks for joining us.
Hi. Oh my gosh, we're here.
We're here. How's your day going?
It's going.
Yeah, a little
We had a
chaotic
little bit
getting
of
here.
a little chaos getting here. I'm so thrilled to be here. What is living in LA if you don't wake up to construction from time to time? And by time to time, I mean
Yeah.
every single morning.
I mean, honestly, I don't live in LA, but it is exactly what I would imagine living in LA is like. So I'm
Yeah.
thrilled you're here with us and so glad that you were able to sit down and tell your story to our audience. So for those who don't know you, who are unfamiliar with you, can you give us the cliff notes of who you are? Obviously, you're in LA, what you do, and then we'll dig into your story in a little bit.
Yes, totally. For some reason, like I'll be totally transparent here with everyone. Like I get so awkward introducing myself. I think because I have worn so many hats and I
Hmm,
plan on wearing so many hats that it's
hmm.
so hard to condense it, but I'll try. So
Beautiful.
overall, I am an actress. I'm a comedian. I live in Los Angeles. I've done everything from personal assisting to managing a restaurant to PAing on set. I mean, I've done everything. I will continue to do everything, but
Hmm,
um, I think I'm just overall like the overarching role that I've always found myself in is a communicator. That's what
hmm,
I do best. I like to talk. I haven't always liked to listen, which has changed since I got sober, and I
hmm,
didn't even realize how absent I was from listening to people.
hmm.
And I think that role has fell into everything that I've done. So now
Hmm.
I have my own podcast. I'm trying to listen to people more and just communicate.
The presenting sponsor of Sober Stories is Liar's Non-Alcoholic Spirits, a spirits company on a quest to replicate and replicate well in as many different alcoholic spirits as possible, allowing us to drink our way. With over 17 spirits, 5 pre-mixed cocktails, and 1 spectacular sparkling wine, all without alcohol, Liar's has become the Sober Stories team's standard for zero-proof drinks that feel festive and celebratory. Sober Stories is a mission-based company. You can find our company's core values right on our About page, and we are committed to partnering with other brands who put people and planet over profit too, which is why we love Liars. They have a sustainability and social responsibility mission at the forefront of their business, with 100% recyclable packaging and a supply chain that reduces intercontinental freighting, a leading contributor to carbon emissions. They also outline their core values at Liars, which are mateship, awesomeness, the pay it forward principle, and empowered independence. In our opinion, Liar's commitment to people and planet makes their sips that much sweeter. Head over to liars.com and use code SoberStories1010, that's the number 10, the word 10, for 10% off your purchase. Liars gives you the freedom to drink your way, to not just provide an alternative to those who don't wish to imbibe alcohol, but to ensure that everyone can enjoy the mirth and the merriment of a soiree or shindig. I love that you say that you've done so many things and you plan to do so many things. I love that
Mm,
we don't have to put ourselves in a box, nor do we
yeah.
have to continue staying in a box as we go forward. I'm also very much kind of a Jill of all trades. I do 1,000 different things. I do nothing at all sometimes. So I hear you in that story. So tell me a little bit more about you and alcohol. What has led you to where you are today?
Wow. Okay,
I know.
let's go
We're just
for
gonna
it.
go.
I
Oh, we're gonna
really
go
love
open
it.
ended. Yeah,
I
open
love
ended.
this. I love this. So, my relationship with alcohol was it's been a really complex one. Like I don't even know that I've ever really shared the complexity of
Hmm.
it with anybody before. Um I mean outside of like my partner or maybe some family members, but I grew up in a household where alcohol was consistent. I think a lot of people do, where it's always at parties. Mine was every day. I was coming home to alcohol being in the mix in some way, shape, or form. And without, you know, being respectful to my family, I won't go into
Sure.
too many details, but from my perspective, it was a constant. And so I never thought that I could negotiate it out of my life. I thought it was built into the contract of growing up, and you just had to make it work. And when I was 15, I started indulging because I grew up in Nashville. Really, what you do is if you don't have a car and you can't go into the city, you sit around at friends' houses and you drink out of a water bottle and you
Yeah.
laugh and you giggle and you think that you are grown up. And it started at 15, and then as I grew older, it just became easier and easier to work into the threading of every single event that I did. And by the time I was 21, I already knew what drink I liked. I already knew that I was a Tito's girl. I was at the time. I knew what my order would be at a bar. I mean, I was so ahead of it because I had been immersed in it for so many years before. And I think really there's some normalcy in my experience, and I think that there's a lot of people who have similar relationships with it when they're young, because I do feel like our society is leaning towards accepting. I mean, it's this big slingshot of like, when you're 21, you get to rage. When you're 21. So of course you want to cheat the system and like have that fun beforehand. But really, when it started getting bad was when I was maybe 23. I started noticing that I was hungover all the time. And then the kind of hamster wheel began of I'm hungover. I don't feel good. Oh, I made some mistakes. I'm not going to drink again. 5 o'clock hits. I'm feeling better. God, I could really go for a beer. That beer turns into a shot. The shot turns into another night. And I'm waking up the next day feeling the exact same way. And I went for years like that. And then when the pandemic hit, I was on a different level because I was still running that cycle, but nothing else was moving around me. So I was really, 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 really aware of my dependency. And look, we were and still kind of are in a global, whole planet pandemic. If that's going to be the time where you want to escape, that's it. I would pretty much say. So I don't feel shame in the way that I relied on the only thing that I was ever really sure at that time in my mind could alleviate some stress. But it did really make me reflect. And there were two parts to that reflection. The first part where I was like, oh, I am just like, I'm starting to look and feel and act like the person that I, as a child, got trauma from. The first part of that reaction was, no, I'm not. I'm the total opposite of that. Oh my gosh, if I have a problem with alcohol, then I'm like that person, and I don't. So I'm going to avoid that truth. And I made an entire, I started this thing on Instagram called Pretty Tipsy, where I would give tips to people while I was tipsy. And I really honed, and I was like, if I can make it productive, then it's not a problem, right? If I can make it, if everybody is telling me that I'm really funny, then it's not a problem. And I had one family member say, are you really drinking in those videos? Are you a little worried about that? And I had the biggest reaction to it. I was like, what are you even talking about? You don't have trust in me? What? Do you not trust that I can't keep it under control? Do you not trust that I don't have enough maturity to navigate this properly? Out of all the things I've been through, out of all the things I've seen, I mean, I had a really big reaction to it. The second part of it was,
Hmm.
Here's the thing. If I don't acknowledge that I am just like that person who caused me so much trauma, I am then that person who caused me so much trauma. It's the
Hmm.
fixing the problem that made me different, not the ignoring it. And when that clicked for me, there were a few more weeks of the cycle because it
Mhm.
is a slow burn. I
Yes.
think there's so many seeds that have to be planted, and it's big realizations that you're processing and digesting. And I think in some way I allowed myself that time to
Hmm.
just peel away. And I was reading some really good books and they were changing my perspective. Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Quit Drinking.
Mhm.
Like a friend had sent me a video of Nikki Glazer talking about how she did it and now she doesn't drink. And
Hmm.
the point of the video wasn't for me to hear that, it was to hear the joke after it. But
Oh.
it was just timing. It was just
Yeah.
like timing.
All right, universe.
Yeah, exactly. I was like waiting for my food order. I was watching this video in the car and I was like, I'm going to order that book. And I knew that it would have a profound change in my life. And it was scary, but it was, in some ways, I think I knew I was ready to just start walking a different path.
Hmm.
And now I'm here, a year and a half later, and could not imagine my life back to where it was.
Hmm.
And that has been insane.
Hmm.
So, nice long
I
answer for you.
Beautiful. I love that so much. And I one of the things that you said made me think of one of the things I heard you talk about on your own podcast, Clear Headed. And it was the episode where you and Sarah, your partner, were talking about both of your sobriety. And you described it as the shattering of that moment where everything breaks and you cannot go back to that moment before. So when you talk about this idea of you had this realization and then it still took a couple weeks to be able
Mhm.
to get your feet underneath you and add more tools to your toolbox and learn more about this and finally get to a place where you could make that change. That just makes me think of like that idea of the shattering. It's like once you had that thought, there's no going back. There's no going back to who you were before that moment. And I thought that was a really, really interesting and in my experience, at least accurate description of it. It's like you can't unknow what you know. So when
Yeah.
you had those weeks and you were reading Alan Carr's book and you were stepping forward into this new life, what was it like in the early days for you?
It was single. I mean, it was
Hmm.
just with me. I hadn't even admitted really like vocally or in a full sentence, even in my head, that I had a problem. I was
Hmm.
just picking up tools around me as if I did, but it was like so many phases of learning and understanding. And I think because for so many people, and I guess I'll really keep it to myself, the idea that I had a problem with alcohol was like the biggest pill
Hmm.
I could ever swallow.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't one gulp. It was like a lot of water, a lot of trying again. Um, I mean, taking the pill out, examining it,
Hmm.
reading these books was like the examining the pill, like, wow, this is a big freaking pill. How am I going to swallow this? Do I
Yeah,
even want to swallow this pill? I mean,
totally.
shoot, I don't know that do I need to swallow this pill? I mean, there's a lot of back and forth internally. And interestingly enough, because I think it was just meant to be, and I don't want to sound too like hippie or I don't know, I'm very a spiritual person,
Yeah.
but I
People go
feel
all
like
in.
okay, I feel like I was meant to have this experience, and then because I was doing what I was meant to do,
Hmm.
everything else paused. I didn't have any auditions, I didn't have any drama with family, I didn't have any
Hmm.
drama with friends, I didn't have any chaos. It was just like this stillness in the air around me to allow for growth and change. There's
Hmm.
like, there had to be room on the shelf to add more things. And so
Absolutely.
everything kind of cleared out.
Hmm.
Me being in it, I don't think I realized that that was what was happening.
Yeah.
But being outside and looking back, I can see it now. And that, just even looking back and being able to observe that has given me so much peace in whatever I'm in right now.
Hmm.
I might not be able to see it, but I will when I take myself out and I look back later.
Hmm. This idea of like taking everything off the shelf, I think really resonates with me. In my other life, I work with women who are looking to change their relationship with alcohol, and I believe very firmly that willpower is so little of this. What is more impactful in our journey to change our relationship with alcohol is our capacity. So
Yeah.
when we have a shelf that is completely full of so many things, a lot of drama in our life, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of stress, it makes it really hard to make that choice and to take that action and remove this thing. And one of the things you said that really, really stuck out to me is like, I didn't have shame in using this substance because it was a tool. Of
Mhm.
course, in the middle of a global pandemic, I mean, there's even so much data now that tells us that alcohol use for everyone, women, men, adults, everybody had escalated alcohol use at the beginning of the pandemic and all the way through because of this added stress, this uncertainty, this unknown that we were all experiencing and in still many ways are still experiencing. And so it makes perfect sense. And I think that that's a really useful and helpful way to look at it, to say I don't have shame about this because of course I did. Of course I had this experience. And I'm so glad you said that, because I know somebody needs to hear that
Mm.
of course, you're here and it makes sense and there's
Yeah.
no shame in it. And what do we do moving forward?
Yeah.
When you said that this was the biggest pill that you could swallow, it made me laugh. When I first got sober, I was so mad. I was so mad that this was my thing. I was like, give me anything else.
I
Literally
know.
anything else. I would love for any other thing to be my thing, no matter how gnarly, because this one just really sucks.
I know, it's hard. It is like a big fat pill.
Yeah. It's a big fat pill. And of course, you and I, on the other side of it can say, thank God it was our thing. Thank God that was the
Yeah.
thing that was the thing that forced us into change. But at the time, I was
Yeah.
so mad. And I don't
I
think I
get
had the
it.
language. I don't think I had the language, but I would have said it was a really big pill too. So
Yeah.
when you started to work through this, when you started to swallow that pill, what did it start looking like for you afterwards?
Well, I also wanna say that, like, I'm glad that that resonates with you because I think that most people understand how big of a pill it is, and that
Hmm.
is precisely what stops them from swallowing
Yes.
it.
Hmm.
And from like, even opening the pill bottle of the big
Hmm.
pill, like, talking about it, ordering a
Yeah.
book, opening that chat and having that discussion and starting those questions is, you know, it's a lot. So,
Hmm.
I think that I continue to navigate as best as I can from the place of, like, even with myself, of understanding it's really uncomfortable,
Hmm.
and that if it was super comfortable and it was really easy to do all the time, no one would drink booze. It wouldn't
Yeah.
even be a thing. Um, because once you don't have it and you have adjusted and you don't and it is easy, it's like, why is anybody doing this?
Hmm.
Why did I do this for so long? And the reason is because it's really hard to not.
Yeah.
Um, but going to your question of, like, what did it look like after I swallowed that pill? Is that the
Yeah.
question?
After you started getting your feet underneath you, where are you a year and a half sober now?
Um, there are so many things that have gone into it, and it's so interesting. I just had this, like, conversation with my friend Courtney, um, and her and I were talking about how the tools that we acquire and that we start with might not always work for us later
Hmm.
down the line. Like, the way that I coped in the beginning probably wouldn't and don't look anything like what I do now.
Hmm.
Because it's a journey. It's a moving piece of art that is just
Hmm.
always adjusting and changing, and that's life. But in the first, I I mean candy out the butt. I mean candy, 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 sugar, sugar, sugar. I still allow myself to have candy, and this is not a suggestion that I have, but when I first started not drinking, when I would want to have a drink, I'd have a cigarette. Okay.
Hmm.
I know it's awful, but it was better than tequila.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been my motto, not with the cigarette, but just with the look. If I'm feeling like in some way, some part of me is feeling triggered, like I need an escape, like I need to do something that I haven't done in a long time, or I don't have, or I've, you know, feel like needs to be some kind of treat, even if it's messed up in the way that it's delivered. Like a cigarette is not a treat. It's bad for you and it's not
Hmm.
healthy. But if I'm going to go and I feel myself going there, I try to give myself the grace to know that just because I'm abstaining from alcohol and substances doesn't mean that the rest of my life has to look perfectly healthy.
Hmm.
It would be unfair to hold myself to that caliber this early on in the scope of things, a year and a half, if I'm
Hmm.
going for my entire life. And that choice to me actually isn't the healthier thing to abstain from everything, because it will make me, I know myself, it will make me
Hmm.
slingshot. It will make me go and reach for that drink. It will make me convince myself that the wine is totally fine.
Hmm.
Um, so that would, having grace and letting myself splurge on things like candy and having a cigarette, it's
Hmm.
just like, I sound like a 50s housewife, but I totally I like let myself do it in the
Hmm.
beginning, and as I got more comfortable with the fact and the experiences of, wow, I just thought I wanted a drink. I had a candy, I had a frozen Snickers, and look, it's 20 minutes later and I'm so happy I didn't have that
Hmm.
drink, and I just wanted something sweet, or I just wanted to do something, cuz
Hmm.
so much of it for me was like doing something. It was the experiences of seeing that payoff that allowed me to then get more comfortable saying, "Wow, I really want a drink. But I've already had 3 Snickers today. Do I need
Hmm.
to go reach for that frozen?" It just was a gradual shift of healthier, better options. And
Hmm.
now I really like tea. I love a sparkling water. And I am at a point where I don't feel triggered by non-alcoholic options. So
Hmm.
sometimes I'll do that, um, just to give myself the option of feeling like I can still be social, like I can still be a hostess. If people are over, I'll make them a non-alc cocktail.
Hmm.
Um, Still feeling like I have that part of myself that is healthier and
Hmm.
better and more present.
I always say a cookie is still better than a glass of wine in my books because a cookie doesn't make me lose my keys or pick a fight with my husband. So it's
Yeah,
always,
totally.
always better in my books. And you mentioned that you're not triggered anymore by non-alcoholic options. Was that difficult for
Mhm.
you at the beginning?
It was something that I was considering because I feel like it's very different for everybody, like everybody's timeline. Some people
Yeah.
just never become a non-al. They never really want to hold a beer, or they never
Right.
really want the taste of like a Heineken Zero at lunch. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that I just chose to be incredibly protective of
Hmm.
myself because I cared so deeply about staying the course.
Hmm.
Um, so it was like probably where my overthinker little bit of childhood trauma came in, of anticipating the worst
Yeah.
case scenario and then prepping for it.
I like that though, because that's a common question I get all the time of like, do you recommend non-alcoholic options? And I'm like, it totally depends. It
Yeah.
is truly like a 50-50 split. I see people who it works just fine, and I see people who absolutely will not touch them. And I think that there's not a wrong answer there. I think it's,
Yeah.
and I like that you said that yours has evolved over time, because that's the other thing. We start to get our legs underneath us. We start to figure things out and start to build other coping mechanisms so that we have different tools to use, and it becomes less of, it doesn't carry as much weight over time.
Right.
And when you talk about this beautiful evolving art piece that is your sobriety, I love that. I call it a living document. And I'm like, why don't I call it a beautiful evolving art piece? Because that's so much more poetic. But I think that that's it. That's it. It really does start to evolve over time, and you start to become more settled in it. So when I was listening to Clearheaded, your podcast, one of the episodes that I listened to was an episode with you and your partner, Sarah, who is also sober.
Yeah.
And one thing that y'all said, and I know Sarah's not here, so we don't need to speak for Sarah, but one of y'all said, we always thought alcohol was the solution, but it was really the problem within your
Mm.
relationship. Can you speak more to that and what that looked like before and after for y'all?
Yes, this is such going to be a good story.
Yeah.
So, Sarah and I were best friends for years. We're both dating men. We're both out drinking, partying. We worked at a restaurant. And the restaurant industry, I'm sure everybody's aware, is like totally
Yeah,
booze soaked. Much
totally.
like any industry, honestly. I mean, like, you go into like a corporate office and I'm sure somebody's got a bar cart somewhere in their office. But
Mhm.
um
I waited
in
tables
the
at the
rest
Red Lobster in Houston, Texas, and it was like even the Red Lobster is very boozy. It's like your shift ended, you'd go drink at the bar with those
yeah, yeah.
disgusting $20 cocktails. So yes, the restaurant industry is,
Sugar filled and
oh,
hangover fueled. You're
I
like
can
the
like still
second it
taste
hits your
it.
lips.
Mm.
Ah, stop. No.
Anyway, carry on with your much more
Yes.
beautiful story.
No, no, no. I mean, yeah, everything. So we both worked at a restaurant and um we were just best friends, and the way that we started connecting was alcohol.
Mm,
Her and I are very different people. I am bubbly and talkative, and I want to like ask you a million questions, and I kind of want to be the center of attention all the time. And Sarah is like totally the opposite. She is like, I want to observe, and I'm cool to just kind of hang tight and sit in the back. So the first ways that we connected was grabbing a drink together and just chatting and becoming friends. And that relationship then evolved to drinking buddies. And Sarah's working the same night I am. Ooh, let's go out. And then that friendship just really became fueled by booze.
mm,
And by proxy, our romantic relationship became fueled by booze. I had never
mm,
kissed a woman. I didn't know what that was going to feel like for me. And I did it drunk.
mm,
And so we like started that venture
mm,
drunk.
mhm,
We fell in love drunk.
mm,
Um and when it was like the first couple of months of our relationship and when we had decided we have really strong feelings for each other and why wouldn't we try it? Like it's gonna be more painful to not try it than to try it because we really
mm,
loved each other and we still do. We have such connection that I've never felt before. But every single time that we would hang out, it would be the booze again. And that would,
mm,
stir up some insecurities or it would stir up inappropriate questions or the
mm.
tone in which a question was asked would then riff off into some kind of shamble of an argument and it would be really
Right.
tense. And it was Thanksgiving in 2020 and I went to meet her family and have Thanksgiving with them. And we got, I mean, obliterated. Rosé,
Mm,
tequila, drink, drink, drink. That situation was so stressful. And I just leaned into the fact that everybody would think that because it was so stressful to hand me another glass of rosé. I mean, I really kind of milked it. I knew what I was
mm,
doing. And we ended up fighting in a bathroom. Her parents could hear it. I mean, it was
mm,
messy. It was messy. And I woke up the next day so that is when I felt shame, because
Hmm.
I knew that it wasn't true to myself. And I knew that this impression that I had been making and that was continuing to make on her family, on myself,
Hmm.
wasn't honest. And that's when the groundwork really kind of started, and I kept it to myself. And I mentioned, "Hey, I think I wanna, like, take a break from booze. That was
Hmm.
really messy. I'm gonna, like, maybe try to, like, not drink when we're hanging out." And she was really all in for it. She was like, "Totally." She'd been sober before. And, we got into another fight, like, maybe 10 days later, and it wasn't good, and it was messy, and the next day I came over and I thought we were gonna break up.
Hmm.
And I said, for the first time ever, like, even to myself, I said, "I have a problem with alcohol."
Hmm.
And it was like everything shifted. She understood more. I understood more. It was undeniable that that was so true. That statement was so true that it impacted everything up until then.
Hmm.
And we both just said, we can be better. We can do better. This doesn't have to be something that we have to keep in our lives. We can step away from it, and
Hmm.
it's going to be hard and it's going to be uncomfortable, but let's do it. Sarah didn't feel like it was valuable in her life. I didn't feel like it was valuable in my life. And so we made the choice to be sober together. That looked very different for each of us because we were doing it for very different reasons. She didn't,
Sure.
you know, get sober because of me,
Hmm.
um, or for me. She got sober for herself in
Hmm.
our relationship. And I think that it just her our journeys have looked different.
Hmm.
Fundamentally the same. We've both been sober. It's been linear for us so far, both.
Hmm.
It's not always linear for everybody, and I definitely understand that, but we've just been lucky. And I think having a partner, I've been lucky enough to say that that's a tool in my toolkit, is having
Yeah.
a partner who's on the same page.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think I'm trying to think. You might be one of the first people on this podcast that I've talked to who has a sober partner, and I think that, like you said,
Really.
that is a really powerful tool to have in your toolkit. Not simply because it helps you stay sober, but I think it's a very different experience to be understood by somebody who is doing the same thing. And
Absolutely.
and I think it's really important that we are all seen in a relationship like that. Maybe not our partner, maybe not our spouse, but somebody who relates to us and says, like, you and I can talk and I can say, yeah, Cait, I totally know what you mean about, like, this is something that was becoming a problem and this is how it was showing up in your life. But when you talk to somebody who either, doesn't have a problem with drinking, or maybe does but is still drinking and still using alcohol, like, there's just a very different version of being seen and held. So what did it look like for y'all after alcohol was removed? One of this idea of, like, we thought that alcohol was the solution, but it was really the problem. What changed in the relationship?
Well, we still had arguments, like, as every couple does, but they weren't so fueled by, like, confusion and lack of logic, which then
Mm,
made them really easy to wrap up.
yeah.
Um, I can say that for my personal journey, like, my first year was a lot of getting to know my feelings. I had
Mm,
been numb to my feelings, which is just so interesting. Like, I'm an actor. What I
yeah.
wanna do is go emote feeling and go
Hmm.
absorb a script and know what it feels like and know what that character is feeling, and then relay that so that an audience knows what it's feeling. And I was so disconnected from
Hmm.
that feeling. So there were so many levels to, wow, how do I feel in my day to day? How do I apply that then to a career that I want to have? That
Mm,
totally changed my approach to acting, everything that I thought, the roles I wanted to go out for, everything. That totally shattered. And
mm,
um and so there was a lot of I think because everything shattered, just like with glass on the ground, you walk really carefully. You make
mm,
sure your shoes are on. You don't reach down with bare hands. And that's kind of how I approached and we approached every single thing in our relationship. We
mm.
had our metaphorical, I think it's metaphorical, shoes on. We made sure our hands were covered. We just really were very, very mindful and careful of the way that we spoke to each other, the
Mm.
way that we spoke to ourselves. It wasn't perfect. There were a lot of flubs. There's a lot of trial by error. I think that's a quote,
Yeah.
but there is a lot of a lot of trying things out. And
Mm,
I am aware of how rare it is to have a partner that's willing to be in that same place of vulnerability of
mm,
like, I don't know, or even just turning to each other and going, "Ooh, that didn't feel good. I didn't like
mm,
that. I'm feeling anxious and I don't really know why. I don't really like the way that you said that to me, but I have no idea the way I'd prefer you to say it to me." Like
mm.
it's this in order to be able to wrap it up, you have to like let it all hang out and let it
Yeah.
fall out and be messy before you can make it clean. I mean, even going back to like the shelf comparison, like when you're cleaning off that shelf and when you are making space, it is a jumble in
Mm.
whatever bag you're putting it into to donate, to get rid of. I mean, that bag's messy, It's
Yeah.
it's like and you have to allow for that mess. And
Mm.
I think that our journey was like allowing for that mess, just
Yeah.
completely and totally allowing for it and having patience with ourselves, most importantly, and prioritizing ourselves and trying to really get used to being in a relationship, but not feeling obligated to each other's feelings, just
Mm,
feeling obligated to our own.
mm.
Um,
Well, and I think you're right. It's really vulnerable to step into a container, a relationship, whatever it is, with your full faculties and all of your feelings and not numbing them down and not pushing them aside and not using a substance to take the edge off. It can feel very vulnerable to step into that and then to learn how to first identify our feelings that we've disconnected with for so long and
yeah,
then to learn how to express those to another person in a way that gets our needs met and lets us be seen and lets us show up in the relationship is really vulnerable. And I think a lot of people are going to resonate with this idea of how the dynamic shifts in the relationship when you remove alcohol because it forces you in some ways to just become a more honest version of yourself in
yeah,
the relationship. And I think that that's really powerful. I also really like that you said that, Sarah got sober and stayed sober for herself. She didn't do it for you and you didn't do it for her and y'all didn't do it for anybody else. And I think that's really important to say. I don't think that there's never been anybody who's been successful, but I find that
right.
people are more successful removing alcohol from their life when they do it for themselves. And by
Yeah,
proxy, how they are able to show up in relationships and how they are able to show up for their work and for their career. I would love to talk about like work and Hollywood and LA and like booze culture and
oh my
acting.
gosh.
And I didn't even like think about the kind of roles that you would take, but like that's an interesting thread. So
I
like
know.
tell me all of it.
Well, like one of the first things I did when I was like, I think I really am gonna have to like cut out alcohol is the first thing I did was I Googled what celebrities are sober.
Yeah.
Because I really the illusion of Hollywood is it's champagne poppin' and it's
Mhm.
like clubbing and it's meat and it's like networking over drinks and you wanna grab a drink and you wanna do this and you wanna do that and everything surrounds booze. And so I really tried to spend time grounding myself and like being really open to the possibility that that might be a facade, in the very same
Mm.
way that that when you see a movie and there's a huge lion talking to a tiny baby, that didn't really happen. That was CGI'd, and that was probably a tennis ball hanging and a guy in a green suit. And,
Uh-huh.
you know, that baby was a twin, and it might not even be the baby that you thought it was. It might be the twin baby. Like, there's so much that goes into the final project.
I really
And
like your metaphors, just as a side note. I
thank
follow
you
them.
so
They're good.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that that's the way that drinking in Hollywood is seen. It's
Hmm.
like this big final project, but really what it is I can say even like, I mean, like for me, I feel like there is a lot of it. Like there's a lot of drinking. There's also a lot of ways around it. And some of the most talented, successful people are sober.
Mhm.
And their career and their day to day and their life still looks just as glamorous and just as
Hmm.
wanted and desirable. And so I spent a lot of time kind of refocusing on that. Um, and then, I mean, to like pull it back to just like the feelings portion of this, I had, and kind of what I mentioned earlier is like, I didn't even realize how much I really like to listen to people. Like,
Hmm.
I just was so either thinking about when my next margarita was coming, how do I get people to take shots with me? In what ways can I make this seem like it's fun and social? What drink should I get? I mean, in a conversation at a networking thing, all I would be thinking
Mhm.
about was the alcohol. So I was so not listening. And now that that has been removed and that it's comfortably removed from my life, I really started realizing like I really like to listen. Like I really like
Hmm.
to hear, I like to ask. And this last year, this thing that I told myself is like my New Year's resolution was instead of getting judgmental, I was going to get curious.
Hmm.
And I think that's really like more truthful to me. Like
Yeah.
old Katie was like very judgmental. It's how I was raised. Have you heard of the Chani app? It's
Mm-mm.
like an astrological app. It's done by Chani Nichols.
Okay.
I think it's Nicholas. I don't know if I'm butchering it. I'm very sorry if I am, but
We'll put it in the show notes.
she has a book, and in the introduction, she completely knocks the nail on the head. I don't know if that's like I'm so good at metaphors, but I'm
Yeah.
also really
Yeah.
bad at sayings.
Hits the nail on the head. There we go.
It's the nail on the head. She says in her childhood growing up, judgment was absent. And so if she can bring judgment to a situation, it's like something that she holds close to chest. And that's exactly how I felt.
Hmm.
Judgment was so lacking in a lot of areas of my childhood, um, that I learned very early to be very judgmental of a situation for survival and
Hmm.
to also feel like I had my own back.
Hmm.
So now that I have kind of put there's a lot of peace around the things I would normally judge out of survival, I've been able to get more curious, and that has then played into I'm curious about like my talent. I'm curious about like where I can
Hmm.
go. I'm curious about where I want to go. I feel like so much of the world and creativity and possibilities has been so opened by not feeling tethered to alcohol.
Hmm.
I don't have to worry about my Uber. I don't have to worry about if my car is going to get towed. I don't have to worry about what I said, how I said it. Was it okay? Was it not? Because I feel
Hmm.
confident in every single thing that I say and do. And if I don't feel confident about it in the moment, I feel confident that I can fix it if it needs to
Mhm.
be fixed. And that has just allowed for career risks. It's allowed for big leaps. It's allowed for uncomfortable questions and stepping away from things that maybe don't feel like they fit me anymore in my career. And it's just been such a growing process. I think my biggest realization around my career was I realized that so many of the milestones that I wanted to be at were being dictated by like the 12-year-old me of this is where I want to be when I'm this age. This is what I want to have done when I'm this age. And if a 12-year-old walked up to me right now and said, "Hey kid, I'm going to give you career advice and this is where you need to be and this is when you need to have hit that milestone and this is how much money you should have in your bank account," I would straight up laugh it off and walk away.
Right.
And because I put it into that perspective, I'm like, I'm not going to tether myself to these unattainable, unrealistic goals that I set as a 12-year-old. Why am I living like that is the rule? So there's just been a lot that's come in my career with understanding my feelings. And I mean, that was kind of a jumbled answer, but
I got it. Well, and isn't it so interesting that when you said that this idea of like maybe this boozy Hollywood thing is a facade, maybe it's not real. And I hear when you say that, like, this is a story we've written, this is a story we've created that maybe bears no truth. And I think that those stories can be such a barrier for people to make positive change in their life because they're so afraid of living out the wrong end of the story when really it's like, is this even real? Is this even the truth? And we've also oddly conflated, and I think this is like a long, we have a long history of conflating alcohol and like misuse of alcohol specifically with creativity and the tortured artist
absolutely.
and it's the reality of it is that it disconnects us from our creativity and it disconnects us from our like the spark inside of us so much and I see it over and over and over again when people remove this from their life expands so drastically. They're doing new things. They're trying new projects. They have new ideas. I mean, like, if you had asked me what I liked to do 5 years ago when I was like in the worst of my drinking, I'd be like, hang out with friends and drink. And it's like the smallness of my world was and I was happy with it. I was fine. Well, I guess 5 years ago, the math doesn't quite work out. But when I was like, before my own shattering, before this understanding of like, I can't go back from here, I was happy with that. I was fine being in this very small, very insular experience. And there's just so much richness on the other side of it and so much creativity. And now I'm the kind of person that has 1,000 different things, a million balls in the air, spinning plates. We're going to lose ourselves in some metaphors here too.
I know.
But it's just so refreshing to hear somebody say like, this has given me such a different perspective on this, and this is starting to dictate what I do. And I imagine like if it were me, and I'm like the farthest possible thing from an actress, but I would also like it would change the roles that I would take, and I wouldn't do the ones that glamorize or trivialize alcohol use or like I think about oh gosh, I should know her name, the flight attendant.
Kaylee Cuoco.
Yeah, and to see like some representations of alcohol use now that are more accurate to like my lived experience for certain versus like the glamorization that we grew up with and the Gossip Girl and all the things where you see where it's like, man, that looks so fun. To see it represented differently, I think is really powerful and speaks to this creativity and the power of I've like completely lost my train of thought. Okay.
Yeah, no, totally. And also, I mean, I do also just want to say that like there's a flip side to the stories that Hollywood tells us with glamorizing alcohol. And that flip side is that you don't have a problem unless you have lost, wrecked, and ruined every relationship in your like you have to be so down on your luck, you have to be hit to the super rock bottom and then when you check all of those boxes, then you should reevaluate your relationship. And then guess who's the villain of the story?
Yeah.
The person who's suffering. And that is what is starting to change on what we see on TV. And we're starting to see more of the truth and the real and the raw. And I do think that, of course, there are so many stories of really rock bottoms,
Mm.
and they are so valid. And I am not trying to take away from that. Some people do get there, need to get there, and that is what causes their wake up call. But there are a lot of people, my story included, who didn't get a DUI, who
Mm.
didn't completely ruin a relationship, who didn't cause absolute mayhem, but it was really unhealthy and uncomfortable. And that is still okay to greenlight
Yeah.
yourself and say, I'm going to start asking these hard questions. I'm going to look
Mm.
at that pill and I'm going to get ready to swallow it, because it's just
Mm.
as true, big, and uncomfortable as a person who is suffering from
Mm.
large consequences.
Mm.
So,
And has just been
Hollywood,
doing it for longer. Mm.
yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
realizing too that, part of my realization was understanding that I wasn't different
Mm.
from anybody that I had ever judged or thought had a problem. I was
Mm.
just as capable. It was just as easy for me
Mm.
to become just as dependent,
Yeah.
reliant, and functioning with that substance as anybody else that I had seen. And I think that was a whole other hard pill to swallow, but there was a lot of freedom in that as well,
Yeah.
because I wasn't alone and no
Mm.
one else was alone either. And we were
Mm.
all capable of being in it together, through it together, whether that was a high or a low. And that was really insightful for me to realize.
Mm. All swallowing that same hard pill that
Mm,
makes us better on the other side. There's got to be,
I know.
we like build a whole health metaphor out of this. I like it.
I
Well,
know.
okay, I could like talk about this with you all day. I resonate a lot with many pieces of your story, and the way that this was this internal experience versus this outward rock bottom. And I think that you've given so much insight to this thought process of the shattering, of the hard pill, and of this stepping forward into what is a very objectively a brave decision to remove this from our lives. It's something a lot of people can't do, something a lot of people won't do. But I hope that there's somebody who hears your story and receives this permission. The last question I always ask every podcast is, if your story were to be written into a book, what would it be titled, and what sort of story would it be?
That is such a good question. I love that you ask everybody that. My story would be titled, and what's so funny is I've had this book idea, this book
Mm.
title. I don't have a book. I have no idea. If I could voice to text an entire book,
There
that's
you
how
go.
it would get written. I'm
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
like so not a writer. I hate like sitting down and writing and focusing. But I would when you ask me that question, I have it in my notes, and it would be called I'm Just Here to Help. And I
Mm.
think that it's still being written. I mean, I don't think I would have a book for a while, but
Yeah.
I think throughout my life, whether that's being a personal assistant and assisting in somebody else's dream, helping my family or friends, now hopefully helping other people
Mm.
find their moment of clarity. I think I
Mm.
just want to be a vessel of helping.
Mm.
I think it maybe would be like a bunch of short stories. I don't know.
Mm.
Maybe it would just only be an audiobook. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of
Hey,
fun to
that
think
solves your book.
about.
Yeah, that solves your book writing problem. Just speak it aloud, and then we'll make it
Yeah.
come to fruition. I love that. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your story, for your time and your candor and your money. I mean, I've got so many nuggets from this that I can make into quote
Yay.
posts. So thank you for making my job a little bit easier. But I just
Absolutely.
really appreciate your perspective, and I have already really enjoyed your podcast. So shameless plug
Thank you.
for Cait's podcast, Clear Headed. It's a really beautifully produced podcast with such an interesting spin. So I know our people are going to want to connect with you. If they want to find you, how can they connect with you? What's going on in your world?
You can find me on Cait Madry, CaitMadry. You can also find us on Clearheaded Podcast on Instagram. And we will be doing a big launch of our website that will house a lot of really great tools, tips, blog posts, videos. Stay tuned. It's all being built,
Amazing.
but
Oh, that's
follow
so
along and
exciting.
yes. I'm
Beautiful.
excited to build a sober world.
I love it. I love it. More spaces for more people in the sober space. There is so much room for just more stories, more spaces, more doors to open. That is my jam. That is my favorite thing to hear. Well, I appreciate you so much and am just so glad to know you now and to send people your way to listen to the Clear Headed podcast. Check out what y'all have coming
Thank
when your
you.
website launches. Oh, I'm throwing pens around. But Cait, I appreciate you and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Beth. I love this.